Hello. So this is how I learned to stop scripting and love the automation. Hello. So this is called how I learned to stop scripting and I love the automation. I'm going to briefly do an introduction to who I am, talk about what changed with automation, and go through our journey with automation, and then talk about what I think we've learned from that journey. And hopefully you can learn something from that too. It's not going to be an in-depth technical talk, so anyone, if you're a beginner, you should be fine to understand what I'm going to talk about. So my name is Max. I'm from England, so I'm still slightly jet-lagged after spending 11 hours on a flight to get here. I've been working in IT for 20 years now. Network administrator, system administrator, developer, database admin. I've done all sorts of things. My employer, we're called Shoreline. We're a very small company based in the UK. We're about only 20 people at the moment. But we've just had some exciting news that our CEO has gone to Japan with the Prime Minister as part of a trade mission to Japan. So that's something that we're very excited about, that we're starting to spread internationally. So all our software, to begin with, was written for the UK government. And it was deployed manually because the government would in no way allow automated scripts to run in their environments. We're now moving to have our own product that will be sold to non-government organizations, and we're moving towards continuous integration and continuous deployment where we can. So, as I said, we started with manual installations. So Jenkins was just building the software for us. We then went to our own automation tool, which was called Bob the Builder. That was based on Apache, and it basically allowed you to quickly download some scripts to run on a server the idea of using Apache was that we could deploy that on a customer environment where they wouldn't have allowed us to run like Chef or Puppet or more interesting automation tools. The overhead of maintaining that tool ourselves got bigger and bigger, and eventually we decided we had to move to a proper tool. We briefly used Puppet for 1 or 2 projects, and for a small company, we found that the overheads of Puppet were too high, so we've now moved to Ansible. And I think Ansible is where we're going to stay. So automation, it's not new. People have been writing shell scripts since Unix was new in the 1970s. I've been writing shell scripts for 20 years myself, so there's a big history of automating tasks. Make was available in original Unix, but it was shell scripts with a bit of logic on top. What's new is dedicated tools with high-level functions. So we've got things like Chef, Ansible, Jenkins, and there was cruise control, which was really just CI. And these tools have only really been around in the last 10 years. So government are particularly slow to adopt new tools. And about 5 years ago, they said, like I said, there was no way we would get these tools on site. Now we're starting to get projects where they are asking us to deliver automation along with the software. So I've got a quick section now on our experiences with starting to use automation for our customers. So the first one was in-house. We have a Jenkins server. The build jobs were getting bigger and bigger, taking longer and longer. So I changed Jenkins to start using slaves. So that meant that overnight we could have just one small master server, and overnight there were no agents running. And in AWS, we saved quite a lot of money by just having small servers. The problem is, I broke all the build jobs. Lots of the build jobs had SSH configurations in the default locations, and we're using shell commands to SSH to the deployment servers and copy on files, move things around, restart processes, do that whole deployment job. So working with the development team, we defined nodes in Jenkins, and now the complete deployment runs as a Jenkins job. There is no shell script anymore. The whole thing is run in Groovy and pipeline. So I said a minute ago we changed our automation tools. So we had one project that was being deployed with Puppet, and I asked a colleague, can you move that job from Puppet to work in Ansible? So he went away, he did some work, came back with an Ansible playbook. It worked for a while, and then we had to make some changes or something stopped working. And so we started looking into what the problem was. And we found that he hadn't actually converted any of the Puppet at all. He'd just written an Ansible wrapper that goes around Puppet, starts up the Puppet server, imports the Puppet config, and then runs the same commands that we used to run before. So if you're deciding on an automation tool and you want to change, it's very important to allocate enough time and enough effort in terms of training so that people understand the tools, as well as the actual time to do the job. So this example it was difficult to find a good example that I could fit into a slide. So I have some typical instructions on the left of how to install an application that you might find on any website. I mean, this is a fairly typical process for installing something like WordPress, that you make a temporary directory, you download the file, untar it, and then move it into the application location. So if we map that process directly into a tool like Ansible, then we'll need to install wget for starters. We'll need to create the temporary directory. We'll need to download the file, and finally run the archive command to unarchive it and move to the correct location. But that's not using the automation. That's just mapping your shell script thinking into the automation tool. If you know what you're doing in the automation tool, if you've had some training, then it's just one step. Because the unarchive command will take a remote source. So you say, download from this remote source, extract the file. Similarly, if your build has a file upload task, and you're not using Maven, maybe you'll have a curl command to upload. You see there's quite a lot of options there. You've got the username and password, which you'll have to pass in securely somehow. There's a lot of things that can go wrong. And instead of writing those shell commands, there's a plugin for Jenkins that's produced, well, there's one, a native plugin and one that's produced by Sonatype that allow you to define that in the UI. This gives the administrator a lot more control because you can see that you can define the Nexus instance that you want to upload to and repository, and you can have all the credentials and URLs away from the development team. So if those change, then it gets changed in one central location, and you don't have to go through all the build jobs and make multiple changes. So what do I think we learned? I think whatever you're doing with automation, whether you're rewriting an existing automation tool scripts, or whether you're converting some shell scripts, or whether you've got a manual process that somebody has written, I think you need to throw all that away, because that puts you in the way of thinking of that other tool. It doesn't put you in the way of thinking of the tool that you're trying to use for your automation. So what you want to do is go to the end state. So understand your end state. You don't need wget to download a file. So that's not part of your end state. Forget about it. You need to understand your automation. And when you understand your automation, you can use the automation to get to the end state. Don't be tempted to use shell. It's easy. Everyone knows shell. We've been using it for so many years that it's very easy to go, I don't know how to do that complex task in my automation tool. I'll just quickly use a bit of shell. Somebody's going to say, but I have to use shell. And you're right. The automation tool can't do everything. But are you sure? Have you checked your application's specific list of plugins and modules and that kind of thing? Have you Googled? Do you need to ask for training? You know, if you're constantly writing shell scripts, maybe the automation tool is not what you should be using. Come to conferences like this, talk to people. So I've been in the expo hall, and I talked to Zebia Labs. They have the same idea as me, and they have hundreds of Jenkins modules. So you can avoid using shell scripts by using one of their modules. And they actually have one of their advertising screens says, no more shell scripts. So thanks for listening. I hope I've made you think slightly differently about your automation and the way you've written it. And if you have any questions or want to discuss this further, you can come find me outside or downstairs later. Thank you.